like, no, definitely don't put any handy sound effects.
Uh-oh, the squelching. You hear that? You're being played off the stage.
Just a general kind of...
Just an entire orchestra pit filled with furiously masturbating men in tuxedos. Welcome to the 2018 Handies. That's right. On this week's episode of Heavy Hands, we are truly honoring the best, the greatest, the brightest, the superlatives of this year in MMA, being myopic slaves to the UFC schedule. Unfortunately for us, that generally means mostly UFC talent, but we've gone outside the box a little bit with a couple of these choices, and we have done our best, our very best, to make sure that these categories, from which we will be selecting the best fighters, the best whatnot, everything of 2018, are not just going to be your average run-of-the-mill year-end awards. We tried specifically, Phil, to avoid categories where, the picks were obvious, right? Do you guys really want to hear us say, like, hey, the breakout fighter of the year is... I mean, who is it, Phil? Obviously, it's...
Kevin Holland.
Right. I mean, did you really need to hear us say that? I mean, it would be, if we were being earnest, it would be Israel Adesanya, and that's what everyone is saying. So who gives a shit, right? Instead, we reached out to some of our listeners. A great many of you, in fact, contributed using the hashtag 2018Handies on Twitter and suggested some interesting off-the-wall categories for us, in addition to the more generic, usual ones that we'll be running through. So, Phil, overall take on 2018 in MMA and the world of the UFC? I mean, did it kind of suck, or was it good? It's kind of hard to recall to really get it all in mind at once.
I think it was good. I mean, it had a lot of high points. The moments that it had were great. I don't think it wasn't one of those years with like a single defining moment. It didn't have a moment like that Mendes McGregor card, where literally everything came together at once in a single instant. It did have a lot of amazing individual performances. We saw the cementing of like Max Holloway as maybe the best fighter in the sport right now.
Ooh.
We saw...
Allow me to interrupt you with a phone alarm. This is a very professional operation, please. Orchestra.
Excellent.
Orchestra. Drown that out. Okay, go on.
What else? We saw, some kind of resolution to that, to the McGregor, Khabib, Ferguson triangle that has been going on for so long, and I think we saw that but we also saw like the rise of Dustin Poirier trying to turn that into a square. So yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of resolution. We saw a couple of double champs crowned, and we'll get into those a bit more when we go to Fighter of the Year. But in general, like it was a good year. It probably wasn't, but it wasn't an incredible standout year that made you go look back at it and go, wow, how could anyone have missed this?
Yeah, I think maybe in retrospect we'll see this. I mean, hopefully, if we can still afford to be this optimistic or this positive regarding the UFC in a couple of years, we can look at this as like an expansion year where essentially, like we were lacking in some narratives. I think we definitely had some, like McGregor, Khabib, huge narrative. We had some important storylines to latch onto. We also had like the profligation of storylines that would have seemed much more important in other years, like the many super fights that did and did not occur in 2018, to the extent that now I think a lot of us are just bored by the very notion of two champions fighting. But on the lower end, 2018 was the year of Dana White's Dancing with the Contenders, and all of the hot talent that show has produced, all of the brutal matchmaking with which they have been tested, but certainly some of them coming through, and that show very, very quickly proved itself a much better vehicle for developing and introducing talent to the UFC than the Ultimate Fighter pretty much ever has been.
Not that they're getting rid of the Ultimate Fighter.
Oh, no.
No, they need that. They need that for the content machine.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
You think Dana White's going to get rid of redundancies, that implying that, like, he would get rid of the 2017 Bugatti in his garage simply because he got a 2018 model now? I mean, let's not be outrageous. Some things you just have to keep for sentimental value. And clearly, the Ultimate Fighter has a lot of sentimental value for a lot of people, most of whom are named Dana White. Yeah, it's still going. I don't know why. Maybe there will have to be a special award category for the year they finally get rid of Tough.
Man, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as you said, we got to see... one of the things we got to see this year is, increasingly it did show us where the quality in the UFC is located. The lower weight classes, pretty much all the way up to middleweight, which I think we'll probably get into discussing later when it comes to Fight of the Year, has given us some of the, is just undergoing still this amazing technical renaissance. We saw, as you mentioned, a ton of new prospects coming up. Breakout Fighter of the Year, whilst it's likely to be dominated by Israel Adesanya, there's still a ton of great prospects out there. So, moving forward, you can see where you want to look if you want to see the good fights in the UFC and elsewhere. Because we also saw, a bit more movement outside the UFC as well. We saw,
true.
Ryzen has been putting on some really exciting events. Bellator has the welterweight Grand Prix, and then we had the PFL, which was, despite being somewhat designed as a kickback for Ali Abdelaziz, still managed to produce some memorable moments and like decent fights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the note of us realizing where the action is, at least when it comes to the UFC. There is a reason we didn't include weight class of the year, because it would have been an obvious pick, I think.
Yep.
Fucking bantamweight, baby. All right. Well, let's start things in earnest then. We've got, Phil, you've done a lot of great work organizing these awards. I want to thank you first and foremost. Award shows are for nothing if not schmoozing and, just like really sickening sentimentality. Expressed with swelling music. I sure hope I was not too lazy to include some swelling music right now.
Thank you so much, Connor. This means so much to me. I just want to give a shout out to my family, my friends, my dog, my trainers, and I hope this is to the world. All right, I'm done.
Okay. You've organized this very helpfully for us, Phil. Among the many categories that you helped or pretty much engineered the curation of, you have helped us to organize this into 3 broad sections. And the first one is the one that many people turning up for an award show will be most interested in. But we hope the later sections will turn out to be your favorite by the end of the day. Of course, these are the generic, boring awards. Your Fighter of the Year, your Fight of the Year, your KO of the Year, your event, your submission, your biggest robbery, yada, yada, yada. The awards that literally every podcast and website out there will be doing, but ones for which we still feel we have some interesting input and insight behind our particular choices. So let's go ahead and start things off with Fighter of the Year. Phil, would you read the nominees?
So we have Daniel Cormier, the heavyweight and now former light heavyweight champion. We have Amanda Nunes, the featherweight and current bantamweight champion.
And soon to be former featherweight champion.
Yep. We have Khabib Nurmagomedov, the lightweight champion. We have Dustin Poirier. And we have Kyoji Horiguchi, the Ryzen bantamweight and the rise in bantamweight and sorry, my apologies. He is also what's the other thing that he won?
I don't know. The Grand Prix. I guess they still do distinct titles in Rise in between the belt and the Grand Prix titles.
Yeah, he was the Grand Prix. Yeah, it was the Rise in
all of
Grand Prix
bantamweight
and the inaugural championship winner.
Yeah.
So, and those are our candidates, and it's a pretty strong field, I think. Well, it's not necessarily it's one with a lot of parity in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we were talking about this, that this is one of those areas that does feel surprisingly lacking compared to some previous years. Like, there's no Conor McGregor who just comes and like storms his division and is far and away the obvious star. There's no Ronda Rousey. There are fighters who have, well, to borrow your own language, Phil, the two top fighters in Cormier and Nunes can essentially be, maybe even the three top fighters can be summarized essentially as got one really, really big win and then did something meaningless in the meantime.
Yep.
Fairly meaningless, but.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the thing is that when you look at these achievements in a vacuum, you can look at, Cormier or Nunes and you can be like, wow, double champ. And then, Stipe Miocic, Chris Cyborg, these are amazing wins. And then, also stoppages and stuff in the other. And then you look back at those other wins and you're like, you have basically just beaten one good person this year, haven't you?
Yeah.
I mean, Volkan Oezdemir, Derek Lewis, much as we love him, Raquel Pennington, much as we also love her.
Mm-hmm.
These are not really the world's greatest wins. But on the other hand, Cyborg and Stipe are great wins.
Exactly.
Although admittedly they are wins which are largely established. They are great fighters in paper thin, terrible divisions.
Yep. And then those are our top two contenders. Then for Khabib, we have a great win, which, given the style matchup, especially in retrospect, is maybe not as impressive an achievement as like Cormier's win over Stipe. I don't know. Like, I
mean, Conor simply hasn't established himself as a dangerous lightweight in the same way.
Right. That bears saying as well.
And Cyborg have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, although for him, that Ally Quinta win, Phil.
Yeah.
Doesn't look quite as dog shit as a Raquel Pennington or a Volkan Oezdemir anymore. It's like,
yeah. I mean, this had me seriously reconsidering this one because, yeah, I mean, Ally Quinta, that win looks a ton better. It was a formality when he won it, and then in retrospect, you look back on it and you think of the fact that he, despite how people are bizarrely downplaying it, he beat the shit out of.
Yeah,
he really kicked the crap out of Al on the feet, and that is clearly not actually very easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I actually give that one a lot more credit than I did even after the
But then McGregor is maybe not quite as impressive in retrospect. Just given, it's lightweight. He hasn't established himself. It's certainly not against that style. I'm not sure we should have had any concrete expectations of McGregor. I mean, certainly only a fool would have expected McGregor to be able to use his striking to really thwart Khabib's wrestling. I'm saying this going off the vague memory that you picked McGregor.
Uh-huh. I did.
Good. Yes, this is the.
We did also agree that whatever happened, this fight was likely to be one-sided, that in the coming out of it, everyone would then immediately downplay the loser because of how one-sided it looked.
True.
They never should have thought they had a chance.
True. All right, let's not be reasonable, Phil. All right, let's start 2019 off with a good old-fashioned shaming, okay? And then hopefully you get a chance to bring out some of my worst picks of 2018 as we move on. Dustin Poirier, obviously a breakout fighter in a sense. He's kind of been breaking out for a while as a lightweight contender. His wins are over Justin Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez, which are certainly not bad wins. They were tremendously exciting fights. They really showed off the sort of new Dustin Poirier that we are seeing now. The combination of crazy, insane, gritty violence and toughness with, the added benefit of greater technique and poise and thought going behind his attacks. So Poirier certainly announced himself. It is kind of hard being in the same division as Khabib to put him over Khabib, I think. Even if, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, if you look at those, if you add together Poirier, just the sheer quality of the people that they've beaten, I think Poirier actually does have a definite chance. Sure. Because Alvarez plus Gaethje is probably not all that far away from Nurmagomedov from Conor plus Al.
Mm-hmm.
But
true.
Yeah, it's the fact that he doesn't have a single an incredible signature win. Alvarez, Alvarez is a great win, a historic win, an all-time great lightweight, but he also got absolutely trounced by Conor not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. Although, I don't know. Still wondering, would Eddie Alvarez compete with Khabib? Could be. All right, and finally, Kyoji Horiguchi, whose wins, I think, are most impressive, basically taking into light the fact that he's been fighting up a division. How much of his success do you think has to do with the same reason that fighters from Japan or international fighters struggle in the UFC? By which I mean bantamweights in Japan are oftentimes the same size as flyweights in the UFC.
Let me think. So who was he actually? Who was he fighting?
We're looking at the big wins from the Grand Prix are Manel Cape.
Yeah.
Ian McCall was one of the big high profile fights. That's just a flyweight.
That wasn't necessarily I
think that was a flyweight fight.
Yeah. A bantamweight fight. I don't know. I mean, because the thing is, his signature win is, of course, is Caldwell for the year. And admittedly, that was another weird semi-prospect loss guillotine sub by Caldwell,
mm-hmm.
who seemed to be, controlling the fight up till then. But, other than Caldwell is huge and hyper athletic but yeah, there's probably something to it. I mean, there's also just the fact that, the UFC has hoovered up an awful lot of the high-end weight competition in the world.
True.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's still. I think it's worth recognizing fighters like Kyoji for doing the damn thing outside the UFC, for building a massive brand presence in his home country, for building all of this momentum, and for doing the one thing, as you mentioned before, Phil, that a lot of the other fighters in the list have notably failed to do, which is fighting a lot, keeping himself in the mind's eye by just staying active. So he deserves praise for that. I think for me, I would come down. It's very tough, I think I would come down for. God damn, Phil. I think I would come down for Daniel Cormier if I really had to pick.
I think yeah.
You think you would pick Cormier as well?
Yeah, I think I might.
It's a tough one between that and Khabib. Nunes, if Pennington wasn't so much weaker in my eye than someone like Cyborg, but even Cyborg for me doesn't necessarily compare to Stipe in terms of the depth of the division that she had been dominating. Dominated a lot longer, but even men's heavyweight is maybe a little better than women's featherweight.
It's a lot better.
I mean, and we know how we talk about how men's heavyweight is trash. Cyborg has certainly been feasting on ready-made meals for quite a while now, and Stipe wasn't. So beating him alone, I think, is a very big win for Cormier. And then you add in the fact that he had both Oezdemir and Derek Lewis, both, so-so opponents. Oezdemir was coming after a big loss, which is why it was still good to see him come back and win the way he did. Lewis, at the very least, gave Cormier a chance to show that his wrestling game, his full-fledged set of mixed martial arts skills, is above the level of the average heavyweight. Because most people exhaust themselves trying to do to Derek Lewis what Daniel Cormier very easily did to him.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thing. They weren't great wins, but they weren't They weren't awful wins either.
No, and he won them both he won the weaker ones in exactly the way that you would kind of like to see him win them. Impressive enough, given the circumstances. All right, let's move on to Fight of the Year, and we'll have to pick up our pace lest we get played off even more often here. Fight of the Year, couple of interesting contenders. I'll go ahead and read through this category, Phil. Whitaker Romero 2. Ding, ding, ding. Poirier Gaethje. Poirier Alvarez. Korean Zombie versus Yair Rodriguez. Ronaldo Jacare Souza versus Chris Weidman. Calvin Kattar versus Shane Burgos. And Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez 2. You'll notice we have sprinkled in some boxing fights. Really just the casual-ass boxing fights, aren't they, Phil?
Yep, they are that.
That's
because
all.
Otherwise it would be way too hard.
Yes, it's also all we ever get to talk about on this show.
Yeah.
Are the ones that have enough crossover appeal. Okay, so Whitaker Romero 2, I think, is like the front runner. Pretty clearly. Because it was an astounding fight. It had all of the drama of the first fight between Whitaker and Romero, which was itself an excellent fight, with much more violence, seemingly much higher stakes, as Romero twice managed to put Whitaker in seriously dire straits. And so I guess it depends on what you want out of a fight. What allows you to call it a fight of the year? Is it just the intensity of the back and forth action, or is it, as it was with the first Whitaker Romero fight, defined by sort of the feeling of perseverance on the part of one of the fighters, like seeing someone struggle and succeed, or at the very least go on, is one of those powerful things I think people look for when it comes to combat sports. And to me, none of these has more of that than Whitaker Romero. None of these has more of a compelling story, more like narrative thrust than Robert Whitaker surviving Romero's onslaught and continuing to go to work on him, despite fighting one of the scariest men who has ever lived. Let's not mince words. One of the most terrifying men I've ever seen, and still managing to fight the fight he did. That stands out a lot to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it carries along with, I think, Triple G Alvarez, is in that the first fights were both, technical masterclasses, but perhaps technical masterclasses that were always at a kind of constant simmer. Mm-hmm. And the sequels were just that much better for being also pretty fucking violent.
Both men did what you would always want. I mean, you have to understand this not happening, but both men did what you would want fighters to do with a great simmering first fight, is to take advantage of all the things they've learned there in order to really put a mark on the second fight, but both doing it in equal enough measure that the second fight is just as back and forth, but significantly more violent and dramatic.
Yep. And I think, a lot of the fights of the year this year were characterized by just insane levels of violence. Poirier Gaethje, Poirier Alvarez, KZ Rodriguez, Jacare Weidman. These are all just hyper-violent, gritty, dig deep, fuck the other guy up and worse than he's fucking you up kind of fights.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it's very rare that we get that kind of matchup, blended with a kind of technical masterclass like Whitaker Romero 2, which is, it's got to be fight of the year, and easily the best middleweight title fight ever. Yeah,
no doubt about that.
Probably taking the crown from Whitaker Romero 1.
Yeah, probably. Although there is that weird thing we've talked about where middleweight title fights tend to be they have often tended to be bizarrely shitty.
Yeah.
Where they just come in under expectations. Weidman Rockhold, we all remember how incredible that fight was. Whitaker Romero 2, clearly in my mind, the fight of the year. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, segment 2, we will finish up the generic boring awards before moving on to our other 2 sections, and I will tease those now. These are, Phil, as you've noted them, the awesome specific award sections: prospects, newcomers, and general freaks. And then we'll move on to awarding the strategy section, where we will analyze fighters' decisions and preparation for their fights. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Hello and welcome back to the 2018 Handies. We are going to be ripping through these, by which I mean prepare for today's episode to be 2.5 hours long. Just kidding. We're going to do our very best here. Moving on. Just steaming through the generic boring awards section of our show today to talk about the KO, the knockout of the year, best knockout of 2018. Phil, the nominees.
It is Yair Rodriguez versus Chan Sung-jung with Korean Zombie. It is Lyoto Machida against Vitor Belfort. It is Yoel Romero over Luke Rockhold, where he kind of scalped him against the cage. It's Jessica Andrade against Karolina Kowalkiewicz. It is Amanda Nunes against Chris Cyborg. It is Derek Lewis against Alexander Volkov. Brian Ortega over Frankie Edgar. Jose Aldo over Jeremy Stevens, a particularly heartwarming one for both of us. Francisco Trinaldo over Evan Dunham. Kind of gut-wrenching one. And then, obviously, Jared Brooks over Jared Brooks.
Now, obviously it should go to Jared Brooks. Before we discuss, like, the boring official choices, if anyone listening to this has not seen the Jared Brooks self-knockout, you have to see it. And then you have to track down the GIF where it has been reversed. GIF/GIF. All right. I don't know how many of you that upsets, but get over it. You have to see it backwards. It's one of the most mesmerizing sequences of images I've ever laid eyes on. There's something about the confidence with which Jared Brooks leapt both feet off the ground in order to smash his head between the plywood floor and his opponent's body. That works particularly well in reverse. Bravo, Jared Brooks.
In reverse, he just kind of springs to the air and rotates majestically, like it's like it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's something transcendental about it. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh man, if you could match cut from Brooks KOing himself to a space module floating through the void, that would be perfect. Yeah. So clearly the real winner should be Jared Brooks, but you know. Let's talk about the boring, generic choices that are more suitable to the generic, boring section of the show. My particular favorites, yes, Aldo Stevens. That one wins big for me because of, just emotional resonance. I like seeing my sweet boy, Jose Aldo, get a big win in a fight that was definitely sort of had the feeling of being on a razor's edge for him. And I also, Louis Volkov, because it was maybe the most quintessential Derek Lewis fight and knockout ever. And insert the video clip that Mookie Alexander now keeps posting on Twitter of me doing a live cast for that and getting excited because the chat spoiled that it was about to happen. Yes! Yes! I know what I'm looking for. Yes, baby, come on. Oh, fuck. And I knew Lewis was about to come back after losing every single minute of that fight. Classic Derek Lewis shit. It is sort of hard not to pick Yair Rodriguez over Korean Zombie, though, because it was such an unusual, fluky knockout. Like, was that the ghost?
How dare you, Connor?
Was that the ghost of Patrick Wyman? Did anyone hear that? But it was such a bizarre technique and such a huge comeback at that point in the fight, it intensified the fact that it was a comeback, that he managed to get it with a technique you would never, ever expect him to be able to repeat.
Yep. We will. Yeah. So, yeah, I think kind of you have to pick that. As much as I would love to pick something like, as much as sort of, although Stevens is probably the moment that I'd watch again.
Yeah.
You can't really not give it to a no-look elbow in the last second of a main event in an incredibly violent fight, which you're losing. Like, we're not going to see many crazier things than that in MMA ever.
Yeah, that's the truth. And one of the major selling points of MMA as a sport is you get to see some truly crazy shit. So if it's not Jared Brooks smashing his head on the ground like a sort of combat sports version of Gallagher, then it's definitely Yair Rodriguez with the insane over the back no look elbow in the final second. All right. So congratulations to you, Yair Rodriguez. Let's move on. Event of the year. Phil, the nominees, please. Or wait, did I do them before or did you?
I did the last one.
Oh, okay. Then
so we're doing this vivisection style, are we?
Yes, which is I've taken the role of Zane Simon, which is to forget who went when.
Excellent.
I'm nominally the host. All right. So, event of the year. Our nominees are UFC 229, at which we saw, of course, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor, the aforementioned Lewis over Volkov comeback, and we also saw Anthony Pettis versus Tony Ferguson, or Phil, as you have lovingly rendered it, ugly and pretty Tony, squaring off. UFC 228, the pay-per-view just before, where we saw Woodley Till, a prospect, promising up-and-coming contender, being thoroughly shut out by a champion who, frankly, deserves massive credit in my mind just for pissing off Dana White so much. It makes it so easy to root for Tyron Woodley, knowing how much he irritates Dana White, and knowing that Dana White desperately wanted Darren Till to win. That right there still stands out in my mind as a massive highlight. It also had the KO of the year contender, Jessica Andrade, knocking out Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and the Sterling Stamen Suluev stretch knee bar from the back, plus Tatiana Suarez, another option for breakout fighter of the year, smashing Carla Esparza. UFC 232 had, of course, Jones versus Gustafsson 2. That one just happened. Cyborg getting obliterated by Amanda Nunes. It had the breakout performance from Alexander Volkanovski over Chad Mendes, and a fantastic fight between Peter Yan and Douglas De Silva, or Douglas Silva de Andrade. UFC on Fox 29, that gave us Poirier versus Gaethje. It gave us Oliveira versus Condit. Oliveira versus Condit. Versus Condit. Did that happen?
It happened. I'm sorry to tell you.
Why has my brain wiped that from my memory?
Because it made you feel sad.
Yeah, that probably is the answer. It also gave us John Moraga versus Wilson Hayes, one of the best performances of one of my favorite gritty veterans' entire career. And it also gave us Antonio Carlos Jr., a.k.a. Shoeface, versus Tim Boach. All right. And then we also had Ryzen 14. Gave us It gave us Floyd over Tenshin Nasukawa, a fight that we will be talking about for many generations to come. Horiguchi versus Darian Caldwell. It gave us Brown versus Crookshank. Scoggins getting Scoggins. Just enjoying your vernacular here, Phil. All right. So 229, 228, 232, Fox 29, and Ryzen 14, the New Year's show. Where do your thoughts lead, my friend?
I think it pretty much comes down to 228 versus 229.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the popular pick is probably going to be 229, just because it was the one that everyone was able to talk to their friends about, and it was the one that actually delivered, and you could be like, oh yeah, everyone come over and watch this shit. And they'll be like, oh, is the Irish guy in it? You're like, yes, he is in it. And it actually ended up being pretty awesome. UFC 228 wasn't perhaps predicted to be that good, but was in fact pretty stellar.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, I think is possibly the slightly stronger event, just because from our perspective, where we have to watch everything, it's just strong. I felt that it was stronger top to bottom. It had almost every single fight was either interesting or relative or relevant, whereas in 229 it had a few, let's say, less than stellar like performances in it wasn't quite. I didn't think it was quite as strong top to bottom. I think 228 had a bit more variety to it. It had crazy submissions. It had completely out there knockouts like Jessica Andrade, flatlining Kovalkiewicz.
Mm-hmm.
It had more kind of what the fuck moments. It didn't have the popular cultural resonance, but for me, it's maybe the slightly stronger event, just like top to bottom.
Yeah, it had more variety. I always do appreciate that when you're watching a whole card. Is like lots and lots of finishes are great, but if I can see like some violent knockouts and still get something along the lines of a Jimmy Rivera, John Dotson on the card, just a really smart, well executed performance. Of course, it also gave us one that I don't think we have listed as a potential. We certainly didn't as a potential fight of the year, but one that should be remembered as a great fight. Lucia Pudilova versus Irene Aldana was a goddamn banger. A really, really good fight that's worth rewatching. So I think I agree. I liked 228 a lot. There's nothing that can replace the feeling that we were getting around the Khabib-Conor fight of just everyone being so wrapped up in the momentum of this story. But in retrospect, with some space, I agree. I think 228 was a better card. And, a lot of fights that I would and have rewatched. All right, so let's move on to our next category, submission of the year.
So we have Ryan Hall getting a Imanari roll into heel hook on BJ Penn. We have Aljamain Sterling's Sulaev stretch over Cody Stamann. We have Zabit Magomed Sharapov's Sulaev stretch over Brandon Davis.
From the same card.
Yep. We have Alexei Olenik's Ezekiel choke, of course, from the bottom against Junior Albini. We have Paul Craig's buzzer beater triangle against Magomed Ankalaev. And we have Blachowicz' whatever the fuck that was, arm triangle thing that he got against Nikita Krylov.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts essentially are, obviously it's Jan Blachowicz for hitting a bizarre submission that would almost certainly not work at any division other than light heavyweight / heavyweight. Getting an arm triangle from the bottom. By the way, exactly the type of submission that Nikita Krylov gets submitted by. This is the man who established the reign of terror that OSP's Von Prue choke is now enjoying. So getting submitted by a sideways arm triangle from the guard is just peak Nikita Krylov as well as peak light heavyweight in general. So that one has a particular place in my heart, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, I think I'm leaning towards one in particular, but I want to hear what you have to say about it.
So some of these sort of can be. So I think one of the important things to consider is always level of competition. Like, for example, Charles Oliveira submitting who's the Japanese featherweight grappler everyone thought was going to be great, and in the end it only ended up being
Hioki.
Yes, Hatsuhioki. Like, that is tremendously impressive. So Ryan Hall submitting a BJ Penn is a historically famous grappler, but he is not what I would consider a great grappler by modern MMA standards.
Right.
And more to the point, I would consider him utterly shot.
Yeah.
And similarly, a lot of these other things are like, there's Olenek at heavyweight. There's Paul Craig at light heavyweight, where no one has a guard. And so for me, it really comes down to the two Sulaev stretches. And for me, then again, it kind of comes down to who did it on the better grappler. And in that case, it has to be Aljamain Sterling. Yep. I think the Brandon Davis has sort of proven himself to not be a tremendous wrestler and grappler in general in his brief stint in the UFC, whereas Cody Stamann really has proven himself to be good. And you could see that he was by the scrambles that he had with Aljamain Sterling. It was simply that Sterling was like a step or two, it was just, a step or half a step ahead of him the whole time. So I think that's my pick. As much as the Ryan Hall, Imanari role was both impressive and a horrible indication that TriStar will forever keep going for Imanari roles because they'll see him do it and now think that they are Ryan Hall against an aging BJ Penn. I got to give it to Sterling.
Yeah. I mean, if there were an award for like most indicative of a doomed future strategy, then surely Ryan Hall's Imanari role would have doomed TriStar enough to get them some recognition. But I have to agree with your logic. It's just, you have two of the same incredibly unusual submission. So I don't know, we may see more of this as just people don't want their backs taken in MMA. That position is there a lot. And we have now seen in the past 2 years, 3 people in the UFC secure a submission from there. But of the 2 that happened on the same night, Aljamain Sterling's was definitely over the better grappler and Cody Stamann. So yeah, I agree. Wholesale. Let's move on to the final category of our generic boring awards. This one, biggest robbery. And this one's always fun to discuss. The options we have, our nominees, are Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. Michael Johnson versus Rustam Khabilov.
No, it's Cajun Johnson.
Oh, Cajun Johnson, my bad. Cajun Johnson versus Rustam Khabilov. Demetrius Johnson versus Henry Cejudo. Justin Scoggins versus, oh my god, I'm forgetting other Nurmagomedov's first name.
Saeed, is it?
Saeed?
Let me just check.
This is the one that's not actually related to Khabib, even though everyone thinks he is.
Yeah.
Claudia Gadelha versus Carla Esparza. And the final choice, definitely not Wonderboy Till. Now, I feel like this is the reason that we have to discuss this category in the first place. Why, Phil, is it definitely not Wonderboy Till?
So we don't give a shit about that fight.
That's really what it comes down to. Why would you get so upset about that fight? The margins were so thin. There has to be some sense of like justice that you're fighting for to justify online rage over a bad decision, right? Do you feel that Stephen Thompson did enough against Darren Till to earn your just indignation?
Does anyone ever feel that way about his decisions?
Right, exactly. Like, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, and this is why I think this is why we also kind of have to exclude Fury Wilder. And even though we have sort of included it as well, in the Tyson Fury is he is ugly boxing Wonderboy. He is there to be giant and super fast and awkward and to win by like landing 3 more strikes around whilst he postures and makes it look like he's doing cool stuff.
True. Yeah. I was very much on the side of that being a robbery when it happened. I still think that Tyson Fury won that fight, but as we said before, Phil, it was essentially Fury versus Klitschko if Klitschko had managed to dramatically knock Fury down in 2 of those rounds. Which is like, all right, I could watch Fury Klitschko and be like, all right, he may have lost this round, he may have lost this round. The whole momentum felt like it was going his way in that fight. But, that momentum can also be a little deceptive. And rewatching some of these rounds, like, there's not a ton happening. The margins are very thin. Wilder lands in some of them as many jabs as Fury, and sometimes that's all that either man lands frequently in those rounds. So more dramatic moments to set it apart from something like Wonderboy Till, which really was just an utter slog.
Oh, well, Till drops him at the end. So there's always an argument that, that's the thing. If there's a terrible fight and one guy does one thing, and then that guy wins, I'm like, well, yeah, it was trash, but you did do one thing, so...
Yeah. Fury Wilder had enough of it, I think, to not be a terrible fight. If they rematched and it could very well fall into Woodley versus Wonderboy territory, where in retrospect you're like, man, that sucked, actually. And now having seen it again, I hate the first iteration much more than I used to. But for the time being, it had enough drama and stakes. I think that it's still an engaging fight to watch.
Yeah.
For me, though, there's just one clear choice here, Phil.
Yeah. Well, otherwise, there's two fights which are just outrageously bad scoring, which are Cajun Johnson, Rustam Kabalov, and Said Nurmagomedov and Justin Scoggins, which like no one scored for the guys that won it, and they're just utterly baffling. But unfortunately, no one cares about them.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably the worst robberies of the year, but they're not the most. They're not. I think to be the robbery of the year, you need to combine significance with. It needs to combine significance with with bad judging, and for me, it's got to be DJ Cejudo.
I agree. This one is, again, we're looking at a fight with somewhat close margins, but I find this one to be pretty patently clear. In fact, anyone who scores this fight for Henry Cejudo, I don't understand what you're looking at and how you weigh things. I don't know how you can look at, for example, the first round of that fight and think that Henry Cejudo has an argument for winning it. I don't know how you can think that scoring a takedown that leads to no further offense can outweigh 3 minutes of so-so offense. I know it's only so-so offense on the feet from Demetrius Johnson in a lot of these rounds, but it's essentially no offense on the ground from Henry Cejudo to balance it out. And in almost every round, there's more of the striking offense than there is the wrestling offense. And according to the unified rules, you are supposed to weight the way that you score these things. If a round is 60% striking and 40% wrestling, the striking should take more significance. Whoever dominated the striking should get a little more weight in deciding the round than whoever dominated the wrestling. That is literally in the rules. So under those metrics, I think very clearly a Demetrius Johnson win. And
yep. I'd like to shout out briefly to, I believe it was Natan Schultz against Rashid Magomedov in the PFL finals, which is actually not dissimilar. It's sort of Schultz plowing forward into the clinch whilst getting just tagged up to the body a lot, and then but he's less visibly tired at the end, and he ended up winning. Also, due to a really weird point deduction, which he also managed to pick up somehow, due to like one really marginal eye poke, which immediately got a point taken from Magomedov. But yeah, it's a bad decision. I know we might get people saying like, but the media scored it 50-50 for DJ Cejudo, and it's such a close fight. How could you? Well, fuck them. They don't know what they're scoring.
You're wrong. That's it. That's all I have to say about it. All right, moving on to our second section. We'll cover a few of these at least before we take another break. Prospects, newcomers, and general freaks. Words there, courtesy of Phil McKenzie. All right, our first category here. Phil, remember how earlier in the show I sort of mockingly derided the idea of us discussing the Breakout Fighter of the Year?
Yes.
Well, our next category is Breakout Fighter of the Year, and the nominees will surprise you. Israel Adesanya, Alex Volkanovski, Tatiana Suarez, Alex Hernandez, Peter Yan, Aaron Pico, and AJ McKee. Your thoughts on the field?
They are all from small weight classes.
True. Adesanya, far and away the biggest man at middleweight. Although Hernandez, I think, has to cut quite a bit to make welterweight. But still, middleweight is where good fighting ends. I think
Although perhaps we should probably include Dominic Reyes in there.
Oh, Dominic Reyes. Sure.
Yeah, sure. You can come in. You're the sole big guy.
Yeah.
Welcome to the field, Dominic Reyes. But
good to have you.
Yeah, a lot of like hyper athletic, awesome, young, violent talent. Like one of the best things about this year, just seeing all these new young fighters popping up. Like we could make an entire list of just the bantamweights that are around at the moment. I mean, there's just fucking tons of them, and they are all awesome. But it's got to be Adesanya. There's no real other option unless apart from Kevin Holland, the winner of our hearts, obviously.
Well, yes. I mean, he could frankly win every award going forward from this year till the end of this show.
Yep.
He could conceivably continue winning awards in retirement if I just keep watching his fights. But, realistically, like Israel Adesanya had the biggest balance between expectations and results of any of these fighters, I think. Like Tatiana Suarez had some incredibly good wins. Alex Volkanovski had one incredibly good win. Alex Hernandez.
Darren Elkins is also a very good win. I mean, in terms of pure quality, like again, Volkanovski has a good argument that Elkins and Mendez stack up better than pretty much anything else anyone has to offer.
Yeah. I think for Adesanya, the reason he feels like the breakout fighter of the year is because of like the context surrounding him. The fighting background he came from, had a lot to do with what was expected of him, especially when we saw him in his early fights, like struggling with the wrestling of like Rob Wilkinson. Then to see him come out and shut down the wrestling games of guys like Tavares and Brunson. Again, in terms of just level of competition, those guys are maybe not Elkins and Mendez. Those guys are not, maybe even like Beneil Dariush's. They're probably more on that level at least. But, given who Adesanya is and what his style is, the way that he beat those guys is still incredibly impressive.
And it was also 4 fights, and and that's his entire UFC career. I mean, you don't get much more breakout than that. Volkanovski did not join the UFC this year.
Right. At the start of 2018, Israel Adesanya was someone only kickboxing fans knew about, meaning only 30 people had ever heard his name. And now he's far and away the most exciting contender in the UFC. So
yeah, Luca Bourdon would be, he'd be out there telling anyone that this guy was almost as good as Wonderboy.
Almost. All he needs is to fight Darren Till now and do nothing for 15 fucking minutes. 20. Anyway, all right. Our next category, Phil. This one comes to us from one of our Twitter suggestions. A friend of the show at Vorpality, VORPALITY. Andrew Pearson is the man's real name. And this category is the Fight Like This Person Award for good process and technique. I feel this one should be sort of ironically, like in memoriam of Joe Rogan. I know he's still with us, but you know how Joe Rogan would always look at fighters and be like, hey, if you were going to teach a fighter how to fight, you would teach him to fight like this. And there's always like Martin Kampman or something like that. Well, this is our version of that. And our idea of what good technical process and fighting technique looks like may not perfectly align with Mr. Rogan's. But, Phil, the nominees for the Fight Like This Person Award.
Robert Whittaker. Peter, or perhaps is it actually Petr Yan?
It's Piotr. They kept saying Piotr. I know.
That's not right. It's not spelled like that. I'm not accepting it.
It's like the phases of my life at which I've tried to say Fyodor Emelianenko. It's like, it's not going to happen. He's Fedor to me.
Yeah. Okay. Jan Blachowicz, Rafael Dos Anjos, Max Holloway, TJ Dillashaw, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Pretty damn strong category, I think, in terms of like really imitatable. These are all process-driven fighters. Some of them very different. Like Peter Yan, for example, stands out for. I'm still constantly, when I think about Yan, trying to figure out like what is his stylistic niche. What's the thing he's going to do really well? But there's still clearly a process, a methodology to the way that he fights his opponents. He builds his attacks and his defenses together really, really well. And that's certainly a version of process. Who stands out to you from this category?
So I sort of think of this in a slightly orthogonal way to the one we were talking about before when it was the submission of the year. It's to do with, at least partially to do with competition. It's sort of, does this work with a non-athletic game is one of the elements to it, or without specific physical advantages, And from my perspective, the winners from that perspective would be probably kind of RDA, Jan Blachowicz, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and I think my personal winner for this year, Robert Whittaker. Because he is clearly a tremendous athlete for his division. And we kind of saw that in the Romero fight where he was simply, he was able to pretty much keep up with the UFC's probably greatest ever athlete. But he also has a game which you could teach to anyone. in that it's very process driven. It's all driven around his footwork, his ability to kind of fight grips and prioritize like positions quickly in wrestling exchanges. His kicking game, which he uses to kind of set up his hands and his entries. This is all stuff which you could, he's the ultimate evolution of both. Well, not the ultimate evolution. These things keep going, but he is a distinct evolution of both the Michael Bisping and the much beloved John McDessie kind of styles.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of brings both of those kind of approaches into something much more, that is both more coherent and driven by much better baseline physicality for the division. So he would be my pick. Yeah,
it's a tough one. Because I don't know. I'm not 100% sure how well Robert Whittaker would do with a significant drop in athleticism. I mean, obviously, that's not a fair question to ask, because putting someone against Yoel Romero without even some athletic ability is just too cruel. It just doesn't work, no matter how methodical and process driven you are, no matter how good your technique. I think Whittaker does get by a lot on speed, though. Having really, really tremendous hand speed, I think helps him a lot. Being extremely agile helps him a lot. But
if you look back at fights like Uriah Hall against Robert Whittaker, for example, you don't necessarily find yourself coming away thinking like, these guys are. I would say like Hall still looks like the better. He still kind of fights like the better athlete out of the two of them.
Yeah,
it's very much the it was kind of the workman against the explosion.
Yeah, and I what I do really like about Whittaker is like he sometimes plays a very, very simple, sort of slow paced game. It still manages to be really exciting because of how well he builds off of his techniques. Like a lot of it is just sort of fencing jabs from long range. But so much happens off of that. So many combinations come off of that. So many beautiful head kicks. And such a sense of pressure that really seems to work particularly well against the kinds of fighters he is fighting. Like his style is, I don't know who else at middleweight could beat Jacare and Romero the way that Whittaker beat them. But it's a very flexible style, clearly. Very adaptable, but also, in context with who he's fighting, like middleweight may be where the good fights end and the fighters start to become shitty and too big to be good anymore. But it is also notably the home of some of the most outrageous athletic freaks in the UFC. Some of the most powerful, ripped, Patrick Wyman beloved top 5 fighters in the entire sport. So, yeah, Whittaker's style working against them. I mean, I love my guy like Jan Blachowicz, but let's be real. Like, I would advise someone to have Whittaker's wrestling before I would advise them to have Jan's wrestling. Just being real. And then the other ones, like guys like Dillashaw and Holloway. I love Holloway's game, man. I think there's a lot of fundamental technique in there, but I also think there's a lot of like audacious risk taking that you probably would not advise a young fighter to go for. In fact, a young Max Holloway might have been a stronger choice, because back in the day he was a really fundamentals first fighter who did not take so many unnecessary risks. But now those risks are like baked into his style. It's part of what makes him such a dominant champion. So that was why I specified kind of physical attributes rather than necessarily athleticism per se, because Holloway is not necessarily explosive, but he does certainly lean, or he has built a style which has required him to lean on some pretty impressive durability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, Robert Whittaker, I think, takes it from me as well. And before we move on to the final few awards of our show, in fact, we've still got a few more coming, I think we should wrap up segment 2 with just a quick hit. This one's suggested on Twitter by @SeniorBigBelly. That's Senior Signor. This is a category for worst fight. And Phil, the nominees?
Derek Lewis against Francis Ngannou.
Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to segment 2 of today's episode. The award, congratulations, Derek and Francis, on your big win. When we come back, we're going to get into such categories as the best bad fight, the best prospect, or as you called it, Phil, the future now award for best up-and-comers, the worst brain thinking in a fight award, and, of course, the B-Hop Award for strategic cheating, among many others. Those are what you have to look forward to in the silliest portion of our awards show coming up after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Should I start off the segment 3 singing like Hollywood? Hollywood. Dana White lives in Hollywood Resort and Casino. Welcome back.
You've already done it.
I have done it. That's it. It's set in stone now. And welcome back to the 2018 Handies. We are rip-roaring through the rest of our categories here. Of course, we ended the last segment on the note of the worst fight of all time. We did say of 2018, but let's be real. Lewis Ngannou. But how about the best bad fight? Phil, you and I are sort of experts on this subject matter. We do the MMA Depressed Us with our colleague Zane Simon on UFC Off Weeks, where we try not only to watch bad fights, but to find the diamonds in the rough, the bad fights that really transcend and become something worth seeing. Who are our nominees for the best bad fight of 2018?
We have a short list of very high-quality good bad fights, and they are Kevin Holland, Thiago Santos for noodly grappling and talking shit. And then we have Kevin Holland again versus John Phillips.
Yeah.
For inexplicable strategic decisions and terrible ground games and more awesomeness. And then we have at Ryzen the incredible Bob Sapp against Osuna Rashi fight.
So, all right. Now, clearly, some people may be complaining, oh, the deck is stacked. Kevin Holland's in here twice. Listen, I'm not sure I've ever seen a more strangely compelling good-bad fighter. There's something about Kevin Holland, Phil, in that he is actually good sometimes. You know, he's got some hand speed. He's got some decent eyes. He's wildly creative, and sometimes that creativity results in some incredibly impressive moments. But he also has no idea what he's doing. Ever. He's very confused. He's way too caught up in talking shit and, like, actively trying to explain his thought process to the person he's fighting, no matter how badly they're beating his ass. For me, we'll talk about Bob Sapp, Osuna Rashi a little bit, but for me, Kevin Holland, Thiago Santos is the most engaged I've ever been in a one-sided loss. Where Kevin Holland was very clearly losing the entire fight, and yet the entire time I was fascinated by how he was losing it.
Also, let's just think about what a violent man Thiago Santos is. Like, he is someone renowned for just absolutely mollywhopping people, and for just being. There's a reason why he's called the Hammer, and why he's picked up so many stoppages, and why he, for example, absolutely obliterated current UFC light heavyweight title contender Anthony Smith.
Right.
So, one of the even more amazing things about this was watching Thiago Santos delivering earth-shaking ground and pound to Kevin Holland, while Kevin Holland's just there going what's going on? This is crazy. Just
looking at his corner while he's being attacked on the ground, trying submissions and then giving a play-by-play commentary to the man he's trying to submit. No, that didn't work. All right, I'm going to try something different now.
It was like watching an actual Looney Tunes character complete with Looney Tunes durability.
Yeah.
Like, just had his head squashed by the anvil, and then his reaction was to like stagger around with Tweety birds around his head.
His reaction was
Kevin just like die like a normal person.
Kevin Holland could literally have his head flattened by like a prime Shogun Hua head stomp, and he would literally stick his thumb in his mouth, blow, and it would reinflate. I'm confident of that. Kevin Holland is the greatest good bad fighter of all time. And if we can't officially recognize him in many of our other categories, god damn it, we can recognize him here. Kevin Holland versus Thiago Santos for me. Just want to give the people who aren't familiar with it a brief explanation of why Bob Sapp versus Asuna Arashi made this short list of nominees.
Because it's fucking awesome.
Because it has a third round in which both men are so tired that Bob Sapp can only walk forward and Asuna Arashi can only throw back fists because he can't even muster the energy to take a backward step. He has to fight the whole third round half turned away from Bob Sapp in order to keep some kind of distance between them.
The whole fight is fucking rad. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it has some amazing punching exchanges because obviously, like, these dudes cannot punch, and then it has some grappling exchanges where they actually like roll around a bit, and it's just like watching giant like weebles with no cardio just rolling around on the floor. It's fucking awesome.
It really is a trip into MMA past where you can describe the action of the fight as, yeah, at one point they roll around a bit. It was weird. Never seen anything like it.
I mean, just from a pure physics standpoint, it really is.
All right. Well, Kevin Holland versus Thiago Santos. Congratulations to both of you men for coming together to create a truly memorable bad fight. Let's move on to our next category. The laugh out loud pure entertainment fighter of the year. Now, you may be shocked by a couple of the nominees in this category, or maybe not. I'll go ahead and start reading their names. Let me know if some of them sound familiar. Kevin Holland, Thiago Santos, Jared Brooks, and Johnny Walker. Now, Phil, you have very helpfully included. This is actually tough, right? Kevin Holland feels like he's got to win. But we also didn't get to honor Jared Brooks with an award already. And you have very helpfully included the Jared Brooks quote that what he said after knocking himself out against Jose Torres. I would like to hear you read this. In fact, I feel like you could really deliver the Jared Brooks appropriately.
Okay, so yes, this is the tweet that he delivered. You're lucky that I knocked myself out, and you didn't do shit to me that whole fight. Just seen your after-fight interview. Well played, but if we run that shit back, I beat you 9 times out of 10, and the only time you do is me KOing myself.
Jared Brooks proudly telling his opponent that he only knocks himself unconscious 10% of the time.
The thing is, I imagine from this one, I imagine like they somehow do this in some kind of bizarre kumite. They would have Jared Brooks and Jose Torres fighting each other like 10 times in a row, and like each one of these times, like Jared Brooks just takes him down and controls him and out wrestles him, and then like the 10th time they fight, you've just got an apprehensive like Jose Torres waiting in his corner, and Jared Brooks just locks eyes with him, like points at him, and then just whiplashes his own head into the floor and sprawls. It's like, yeah, bitch.
Just does a majestic swan dive, leaping off the ground and pile driving himself into the ground. Truly, Jared Brooks knocking himself out. One of few things have made me laugh so hard, and I still laugh every time I see that GIF, at least for a little bit. So, I mean, that might be it for me. Like, I'm not sure what could top that, Phil, to be honest. I love Kevin Holland, but Kevin,
I still think it's got to be Kevin Holland.
I think Kevin Holland's greatest single moments are yet to come. I think we're going to have a lot more of joy from Kevin Holland. I don't know how far Jared Brooks will go. I doubt he'll ever do something as funny as that again, to be honest. I think the chance of it happening is actually decidedly less than 10%, despite Brooks' own unflattering estimation. So I feel like I have to give it to Jared Brooks.
Okay, I'll go with it. Yeah. I mean, it's particularly because he did follow it up with the tweet.
Yeah.
That did make it 3 to 4 times better.
Absolutely.
It's like, I only do this 10% of the time.
Also,
I think it was
just starting the tweet with the phrase, "You're lucky that I knocked myself out."
Also, I think it was Smoogie MMA that at Smoogie MMA that quoted him when he'd been talking about how unpromotable the top of the flyweight division were. I think it was maybe the Cejudo Johnson fight or something. He was like, these guys, they're just not promotable. They're not interesting. If I was in there, I would make this division one people were caring about. And Smoogie was just like, well, if you think you can do any better, then knock yourself out.
All right. Daps to Smoogie, man. One of the best MMA accounts on Twitter. I suppose we're shouting people out now, but Smoogie MMA, definitely worth a follow. Okay. All right, let's move on to our next category. God. I just can't stop seeing that self-KO in my head. It's just replaying over and over in reverse. Okay. Our next category, the Future Now Award for Best Up-and-Comers. Oh, and in fact, Phil, you have this as our best up-and-comers fight. So the best, essentially this category is the best fight between prospects, which I like. A lot of times these are the fights that like you get to look back on after careers have wrapped up and really be amazed that you got to see two, at that point, highly accomplished fighters before they'd really accomplished it all. So like in boxing, I like Marlon Starling versus Donald Curry is a great series of fights between two guys who would go on to do much bigger things than fighting each other. Who do we have for this category? Our nominees.
So we have Calvin Kattar versus Shane Burgos. We have Aljamain Sterling versus Cody Stamann. We have Alexander Hernandez versus Olivier Aubin-Mercier. We have Matt Schnell versus Naoki Inoue. And we have Arnold Allen versus Mads Burnell.
Some good choices here. I'd almost forgotten about Arnold Allen versus Mads Burnell.
Yeah, it's one of the strongest ones, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was a breakout performance for Mads Burnell, who was a fighter with potential before, but like put it all together in an astounding way, and then it still had the little narrative twist of Allen still being experienced and tough enough to eke it out in the end. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have been disappointed to see Burnell leaving the UFC after that, but it was an amazing performance. Aljamain Sterling versus Cody Stamann, another like great fight between two of the up and comers in that division. I think Sterling is getting closer to be a veteran than a prospect at this point, but he still kind of managed to. It was him proving that he developed beyond the kind of the struggles that he'd had with Brian Caraway. To beat, a sort of more high-powered version of that style matchup. Alexander Hernandez just being incredibly impressive. And then kind of Matt Schnell versus Naoki Inoue. This was Schnell managing to find a fight where his sort of durability issues wouldn't be exposed and sort of managing to expose some technique issues with Naoki Inoue.
Yeah, a fight I like a lot. I've actually really enjoyed watching. Like Matt Schnell was a fighter I thought had some potential, and then he suffered some really dramatic losses where it was like, well, I guess maybe we're about ready to write Matt Schnell off, and he has sort of retooled his style to the extent that now I'm willing to get a little excited about what he can do again. And that was kind of the performance that sort of set that in stone against Naoki Inoue. So a very good pick.
But we know there's only got to be one winner, and we know what it is.
Yeah. Calvin Kattar, Shane Burgos. Truly one of the best fights of 2018. In fact, it was in our Fight of the Year category for consideration as well. Maybe didn't have all the dramatic momentum shifts until the final moment, which, let's be honest, it was also one of the best KOs of the year. It should certainly be in the discussion. But just a really closely matched fight with both guys. It was a fight with a lot happening, and yet the margins were narrow. Both guys adjusting to each other constantly, having to continually come up with new ways to turn the fight back in their favor. Kattar Burgos, hell of a fight.
Yep, it's one of the rare things. So you can get young fighters following a game plan. You can get young fighters showing impressive technique. It's rare that you get young fighters with the kind of nuanced back and forth kind of strategic struggle that we saw in this one, and it's awesome, and everyone should watch it and love it.
Yeah, a fight that really like lives in the tactics. You could watch a dozen different exchanges from that fight over again and be like, man, there's a lot of good initiations and responses happening back and forth here. Super fun. All right. Now, this one's a little hard, Phil. This one forces us to remember the bygone era in the history of the Heavy Hands podcast. Our next category, sorry. Our next category is the Patrick Wyman Memorial Award for explosive muscularity. Suggested by Twitter user Amnesia. Phil, our nominees.
Okay. So we've got Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos as a fight. And then we just have a number of individuals showcase great ability in the arena of explosive muscularity. And we have Davison Figueiredo, Yoel Romero, and Paulo Costa.
Something about just breaking up while imagining Paulo Costa in my head. Like, Borrachinha is so diametrically opposed to the mere notion of tears.
Man, that really should be like some kind of fighter tagline or something or like one of the warm-ups, one of it for his fights.
His fight shirt says Borrachinha, antithetical to tears.
Yeah, my personal pick has to be Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos. When I think about what sadly deceased Patrick Wyman would have wanted if he was alive today, he would have wanted to see two yoked up dudes just knocking 7 shades of shit out of each other.
Yes, he would.
Got knocked out.
Yeah. Has any fight, I mean, we all know, first of all, we have to say the dearly departed Dr. Wyman would have out deadlifted both Jimmy Manuwa and Thiago Santos.
Effortlessly.
I mean, he could have deadlifted the both of them while they were fighting, but has any fight ever been more defined by nothing so much as explosive muscularity? I would submit that no. This is really the ultimate. This is the archetype for an explosively muscular fight. So I agree. Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos has to take the cake. Although looking at these men's figures, cake is something that hasn't passed their lips in a long time. All right, let's move on.
I hope Pat got to watch that from wherever he is now.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's LA. Let's be real. It's LA. All right. Moving on to the last category in this section before we close out the show with our strategy thoughts, getting back to the little technical language, the last outrageously goofy award, the Uchronia Award for Best Fight What Never Actually Happened. This one suggested by, once again, Senor Big Belly, and others also suggested this one. Now, Phil, define for our audience, as you had to already define for me, what Uchronia means.
It's an alternative timeline.
All right.
Basically.
Okay, now we all know. All right, now we're all up on the same page. I'll be really embarrassed if I find out that every listener of the show knew that, and I was the only one who was not in the know. But let's see. Our nominees for the Best Fight What Never Actually Happened. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Max Holloway. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar. Max Holloway versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. Paulo Borrachinha Costa versus Yoel Romero. Now, had that happened, Phil, I think that would definitely take the cake in our previous category. That has to be.
That
said.
might have actually brought Pat back to life.
Yeah,
Might have been the metaphorical lightning bolt to just, strike his grave and just see him, deadlift the coffin lid off.
At the very least, the coffin lid may have listed. At the very least, it would have gotten some life out of some part of Patrick Wyman while he lies in the grave. Something would have risen, if not the man himself. And finally, Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad versus Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. Now, one of these things is not like the others, Phil. Again, I have to point out for our listeners what I've already pointed out to you, that you did choose to write Bilal, remember the name Muhammad, as one continuous name with no quotation marks. And I realize now in retrospect, that is always how you say his name, in full, nickname included. Bilal Muhammad versus Eliseu dos Santos might seem like, I mean, obviously it doesn't include Max Holloway or Khabib Nurmagomedov, so that's one way in which it doesn't fit in with most of the other ones in this category. But it's not like an elite of the elite kind of fight. It's not a title fight. It's not a fight between established top 5 contenders, and yet it would have been a really good fight. And we were really excited that it was going to happen when it was originally scheduled. And I really hope they make it again, because I want to see it still.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome fight between one guy who's very much built his own process-based game, you know, out of the slightly different pieces of the regular MMA, of, you know, a typical MMA approach. He's, you know, Bilal Muhammad, sort of a right hand and takedowns and leg kicks, and it doesn't seem like it's very unique on the surface, but it's very, you know, very individualistic when you get down to it, and he's just a really smart fighter. And then you've got Zaleski dos Santos, who is someone who's, you know, evolved into pretty much his generation's Condit. And I don't know why anyone wouldn't love that fight. And yeah, it bummed me out when we lost it.
Both guys marked in a lot of their fights by like their gritty determination. Like it would have been a real clashing of heads between two really interesting fighters. So yeah, equally bummed. Now obviously Khabib and Max figure in a lot here. I think this category more than any other sort of suggests one of the major stories of 2018, super fights that didn't happen, injuries, and health issues for promising fighters. Max Holloway had a really rough start to the year with a couple of potential huge matchups that just didn't pan out for him. Khabib Tony is permanently cursed, and at this point I will just say, to save all of us, it's never going to happen. Don't get your hopes up. At least you'll be pleasantly surprised if it actually does. And one that I think I'm most sad about is probably Max versus Frankie, because it was like a realistic right about to happen. Didn't have any other kind of bad juju surrounding it, and it just didn't happen. And it's still a fight I want to see. But with where Frankie is right now, it almost feels like the window for it may have passed. Where it's one of the only matchups here that feels like we don't have much of a chance of seeing going forward.
Yeah, you can never count Edgar out, but yeah, he's, you know, clearly getting older in a division where it's full of young, hyper-dynamic, dangerous threats.
And he is now most assuredly facing men who are, on average, larger than the ones he used to fight as lightweight champ.
Yep.
So it's like things are just getting harder for Frankie Edgar, and he's just getting older.
But with all that being said, you know, I think there's one fight on here which has to win it, and it's obviously Khabib Tony. Yeah. I think Khabib Max is you know, incredibly fascinating, but it just hasn't been dangled in front of us quite so many times.
Yeah, and I basically that's it. Because I said before I wasn't sure the matchup has a different feeling of competitiveness, but honestly I just haven't been made to think about it as much. Because it hasn't been something that we've been waiting to see. For all that boxing fans and MMA fans alike make fun of Oscar De La Hoya and Bob Arum for saying things like, "Ooh, the matchup has to marinate." It does help. And Khabib versus Tony is maybe over marinated at this point. It's maybe on the verge of the meat starting to get kind of pallid and mushy, but it's going to have a lot of flavor no matter what. And it has, just having that one on the horizon and teased for so long means I think it's the clear runaway pick for a fight that we really would have liked to see in 2018 that we most certainly did not get to. All right, well, that wraps up this section of the show. Let's move on to the strategy section. And here we have just 4 more categories to award handies in. The first one, worst brain thinking in a fight award. Phil, our nominees.
Up first, we have Jared Brooks versus Jared Brooks. You have Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw 2. Chris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes. Kevin Lee versus Alia Quinta. Andre Sukumtar versus Sean O'Malley. Marcin Prachnio versus Sam Alvey. And Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier.
Strong field.
Eddie Alvarez, a slightly, he didn't fight a stupid fight against Dustin Poirier, just to establish why he's in here. But he did, once again, throw a completely inexplicable foul.
Yeah. Yeah, he wouldn't be on this list without the first fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Having ruined his chances in the first fight with a blatant foul, then to do the exact same thing. A different foul, but the same concept again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not new to this sport, Eddie.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Strong field here, Phil, honestly. Like, I mean, you might have to go to Jared Brooks.
Man, your Jared Brooks loves knows no bounds.
God,
I'll tell you what.
that.
So a few of these are semi-acceptable. So Andre Sukumtar, he was really fucked up against Sean O'Malley. He probably was not functioning on. But this was when Sean O'Malley wrecked his ankle, and then Sukumtar just controlled him on the ground whilst clearly being 2 rounds down and then lost.
Yeah.
So it was done, but then again, I just don't think he was in his right space. Kevin Lee versus Alia Quinta, I still think this was stupid from Kevin Lee. He just didn't pressure or try and get his takedowns going early. I think he was far too confident in his own striking, but it wasn't.
Does the fact that his corner seemed to be on board with his approach to the fight make it better or worse? His corner was largely telling him to jab from southpaw. Does that make it a better example of brain thinking or a worse example of brain thinking?
Yeah, it just makes it collective bad brain thinking.
Right.
Chris Cyborg, Brunson-esque, as we described it.
Yep.
Marcin Prachnio, an underrated and low-level one, but I still do like someone who this was another one that just made me laugh. He actually maybe we should have included him in the laugh out loud category of the year, because he was someone who I believe beforehand was saying that he was going to win belts in 2 different weight classes in the UFC. Ooh. And his plan was to go in there, run into Sam Alvey's only counterpunch, then smile, beckon, and rush into the same counterpunch.
Yep. No one has. There's almost the Jared Brooks gif makes me laugh so much because there's such a feel of fatalism to it. You watch it in slow motion. That's why the backwards one is so funny too. You watch it in slow motion. It's just watching something inevitably hilarious happen. There's a special joy in that. And Prachnio's knockout loss to Sam Alvey was definitely along the same lines. That replay, just seeing him walk with a lowered guard straight at Sam Alvey, not 10 seconds after being dropped with a counter right hook. Just walk. No jab, no feints. He would have, had Sam Alvey not thrown the right hook, for all that I can tell, Marcin Prachnio would have tried to walk right through him. He would have just kept going. There was no indication that he was ready to stop or do anything else other than just continue walking forward until Sam Alvey knocked him out. There's such a feeling of inevitability. You have to laugh. So yeah, I think that's actually a strong sort of underdog contender here. The one you didn't mention, Cody Garbrandt, TJ Dillashaw too. Basically along similar lines to the Alvarez mistake against Poirier, in that Garbrandt, maybe even one-upped Alvarez. He didn't foul, but he sort of found a way to lose the way he did the first time, but faster and more humiliatingly. Yeah,
so this is my pick, and I think it has to be. It's probably most people's picks. Because it combines 2 of the dumb things, right? It combines the Marcin Prachnio thing with the Eddie Alvarez thing, in that A, you did this last time, and B, he then does the same thing repeatedly. Is that he just gets countered on a huge right hand.
Yeah.
Then immediately tries it again until he gets knocked out. It combines everything. It's got the inevitability, the fact that this was exactly how he lost in a previous fight. It's a special moment.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. It's 3 right hands, each one countered in a row. Another one where watching it in slow motion is there were so many points at which you could have decided to start doing something else, or added some variety, anything. But no, just planting your feet in open space, not cutting off the cage, not changing angles at all, not moving your head, and just throwing the same telegraphed single punch 3 distinct times in a row until the guy you're throwing it at finally times you well enough to knock your ass down. Yeah. A special display of bad fight IQ. Did you hear, by the way, Phil, they just made Cody Garbrandt versus Pedro Munoz?
Yes, I did, and that's an interesting fight. But
pretty rough comeback fight, I think.
Yeah, it's only a step. It's only a slight step down from the John Lineker risk.
Yep.
It's that, like, you need to fight a smart fight and stay on the rails at all times.
Mm-hmm. So, we'll see. What a turnaround, right, from Cody Garbrandt, looking so calm and collected and composed and intelligent in his fight with Dominic Cruz to literally the opposite of all of those things in the second fight with TJ Dillashaw over such a short period of time. All right, let's move on to our next category, the Best Game Plan Award. This one, close to my heart, Phil. I like a good strategy. I like when a fighter comes in with a clear idea of how to beat their opponent and executes it perfectly. So, of course, the first nominee in this category is Thiago Santos versus Jimmy Manuwa, a fight we discussed recently in which Thiago Santos evidently had a game plan and chose mere minutes before the fight to throw it out the window in favor of destroying Jimmy Manuwa with the fury of 1,000 ancient gods. A decision, by the way, his corner was fully on board with. It was like, I don't want to do all the stuff we talked about. I want to brawl. And his corner was like, hey, do you. You know, believe in yourself. And God did he. Other nominees, John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson, another recent fight, another excellent game plan and execution. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier versus Eddie Alvarez, and Renato Moicano versus Calvin Kattar. Again, a strong field, a lot of really, really intelligent, well thought out performances here. Your thoughts on them?
I really don't know who to pick for this one,
right,
apart from Thiago Santos, obviously. But I think for me, it's probably somewhere between Nurmagomedov and Moicano. I think Jones Gustafsson was incredibly impressive, and I was actually really most impressed by Jones's ability to reintegrate his grappling into his game.
Mm-hmm.
But in part, I think it was due to the fact that he's just developed into a much better kickboxer than Gustafsson, and that was what, as Jordan Breen might say, that was the straw that stirred the drink.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of ancillary improvements that I think in a lot of ways he developed to beat DC. That just ended up being also incredibly useful against Gustafsson.
Definitely.
Similarly, Poirier versus Alvarez, I think that's, again, stylistic developments, which meant that he'd just become a much better style matchup for Alvarez over time, and that it was just him settling more and more into his own style that allowed him to kind of win out.
There's still enough of a marked difference between their first fight and their second fight, though, to make it notable how well Dustin stuck to the game plan the second time around.
Yep. So I think it comes down to either Khabib or Renato Moicano. And I'm not sure which one of those I like more. Khabib was, again, very impressive. He made sure to get his wrestling rolling very early. They drilled, must have endlessly drilled specific counters for Conor. You could see if you watch it back in slow-mo, there's the points where Conor would go back for the pullback left hand, and Khabib would already be ducking under it. This was a very, very, very well rehearsed performance, and one which kind of showed the difference between an elite camp, perhaps, and one that maybe isn't quite on that level. And then Renato Moicano, an amazing kind of duel of jabs in the first round, and then Moicano kind of gently twisting it into a kickboxing match after that, and figuring out how to take Kattar's leg away from him.
Tough, right? I do.
Yeah.
There's something I like just like historically I've always liked the low kick to jab counter, and watching Moicano find like a half dozen different ways to make that work. Like one thing that always really sets apart good execution or good game planning to me is when an opponent can systematically take away elements of their opponent's attack. And I thought Moicano does stand out in my mind as someone who very specifically negated like key aspects of Calvin Kattar's fighting style. Like it was a fight that it had a really dramatic difference between how competitive it was in the first round and how one-sided it was by the end. Maybe that's not fair because Khabib more or less had an entirely one-sided fight against McGregor, except for the round in which, for all intents and purposes, he seemed to sort of be taking a breather.
Yep.
So, and that's a good aspect of game planning as well. Like to beat the shit out of somebody, let them exhaust themselves trying to come back while you catch your breath and then just finish them off. Masterful pacing there by Khabib as well. It is a tough pick.
Yeah. I mean, I think I might actually pick Moicano. Just because it was the style matchup that lent itself to a competitive fight. And as mentioned, I don't think the Nurmagomedov-McGregor one ever would, no matter who came out top. And so, the fact that he managed to turn it from competitive into non-competitive over time, and I'll take Moicano for me.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with the same logic. Nurmagomedov-McGregor was at the very least going to be one-sided. At least that's the way it still feels. Moicano-Kattar clearly wasn't one-sided at the start, and Moicano found a way to make it one-sided, which that sounds like a good game plan to me in a competitive matchup. All right, 2 categories left. Phil, please read us the nominees for the B-Hop Award for Strategic Cheating. This one suggested to us by Piddle MMA, at PDL MMA on Twitter, also / at Aruna Miss.
So we have a relatively short list here. We have Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. We have Alex Oliveira's tremendous fence grab versus Gunnar Nelson. We have everyone who strategically missed weight, of which there were a lot this year. And weight, I believe people who missed weight did much better than those who actually had a really high success rate this year. And then finally, we have the Leech trying to pull out Jake Matthews' eye. Thank you, Li Jingliang, for making it hard to be a fan of yours.
Thank you to one of my favorite fighters for being a shithead. Yeah, he's also had he has also had some really good cheating in his other performances too. A lot of cage grabs, I think, in his last fight. He's a grimy bastard, and you got to respect the art of Dendasso. However, this is the B-Hop Award for strategic cheating, and one has to wonder, both from a career and fight perspective, how strategically viable the Leech's horrendous 3-knuckle deep eye gouge really was, especially given that he still clearly lost the fight.
Yeah. I think I give him full credit for, really trying and putting his heart and soul into his cheats, but yeah, don't try and pull people's eyes out.
Yeah.
That's not right.
It's not right.
And it's probably adversely affected him to at least some degree, because it was basically, beforehand he was a beloved underdog, dark horse action fighter, and after that, basically what everyone remembered about him was he was that crazy dude who tried to pull internal organs out, like the bad guy from Temple of Doom.
Yeah, he might still get past it, but it is notable now that even though hardcore fans still show up to watch the Leech fight, they still know he's a must-see action fighter. You can't visit any comment section or message board or chat thread or anything anymore after one of his fights without at least a few people being like, can't root for him anymore because he tried to pull Jake Matthews' eye out. So,
but from my perspective, just for sheer volume, I know that strategically missing weight, I think, is a strong contender this year. But seeing as he hasn't won anything else this year, I got to give some dap to Conor McGregor for his amazing efforts in the Khabib fight. I mean, so I think he need Khabib on the ground. Admittedly, McGregor was, on his back. Obviously, he never had top position on Khabib. He held onto the fence. He held onto Khabib's gloves, and he held onto Khabib's shorts. I mean, he really fouled his ass off in that fight. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he even got a warning.
No. I think maybe the referee had pity on him because he was largely losing the fight despite the fouls. And
also the referee didn't want to be the guy who got endlessly shat on by Conor McGregor drones for like. I imagine that is like something which actually pops into your head when you are in a serious, major, high-level fight. It's just that everyone will come after you if you sanction one of these guys.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to go for a surprise vote here, Phil. I'm going to say everyone who strategically missed weight. I think this was the year of the weight miss. We have seen a lot of it. 2018 was by far, for the UFC, the biggest the roster has ever been relative to their actual fighting weights. Their fighters are huge now. Like people don't even think of anymore as notable, but like Jalen Turner, who got knocked out by Vicente Luque, is massive for a welterweight. He's bigger than some middleweights. Max Holloway is huge. Khabib Nurmagomedov is really big for his division. It's gotten to the point where like Brian Ortega's a huge featherweight. We don't even think of these guys as massive fighters anymore. And when you have that much of a disparity between walk around weight and competition weight, you have a lot of misses. And quite a few fighters have done the math and realized, it seems, many of them, I'm sure deliberately, that the 20% they lose from their purse is worth taking home a win bonus by winning the fight. I think we've seen a lot of cases of fighters who realize the weight cut is going badly or is difficult and just sort of stop trying en route to the fight. Yoel Romero, notably, I believe, did that when he fought Luke Rockhold. Or was it Robert Whittaker? Or did he miss in both of those fights?
I believe he missed in both of them.
All right. Yeah. And at least one of them seemed to be a clear case of, it's going to really, really affect me to try to make this weight. Again, I understand. This pick to me really encapsulates the purpose behind this category, which is the complicated emotional resonance of Dandaso as an art form. You know, nobody likes cheating, but also, like, if you have any empathy at all, you gotta understand the drive to cheat. And, missing weight is just one of those ways of cheating that is really, really endemic and particular to MMA at this moment, I think.
Yep.
All right.
There were a lot of them last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so wait a minute, I think there's maybe some kind of record here. Let me just see what the kind of scores were. 9-4.
Okay.
And let's also include that a lot of people thought that Yoel Romero beat Robert Whittaker.
Oh, yes.
Which would put it to 10-3.
Yeah. So, missing weight, better for your health and your paycheck than making weight. That has been proven. All right, our final category here. This one, Phil, I'm so thankful that you chose to put this one last on the docket. This one was suggested to us by, let me find the name again. I'm so sorry. So sorry. This one by a longtime listener and patron, Kylan Kumo. Kumo? He's never given me advice on how to correctly pronounce his name, but at Kylan Co on Twitter. This is the Rebush Chalice. I really am truly touched by the name. Oh, God. Now I'm thinking about Dr. Patrick Wyman again. This is the Rebush Chalice, the award for winning with the greatest disparity, the greatest athletic disparity through sheer grit, toughness, and craft. And the nominees are Jan Blachowicz over Jimmy Manuwa. If that doesn't make you think of the dearly departed Dr. Wyman and the discussion we had about that fight just before it happened, then I don't know what else will. Claudia Gadelha losing to Nina Ansarov, or rather I should say Nina Ansarov defeating Claudia Gadelha. Sean O'Connell over Vinny Magalesh from PFL. Derek Lewis defeating Francis Ngannou with sheer grit and toughness despite a distinct athletic disparity. Paul Craig over Magomed Ankalaev, a wild come-from-behind submission victory that to this day I'm sure Ankalaev is mad that he even bothered to tap with just 1 second left in the third round. John Moraga is on here twice, in fact, over Magomed Bibulatov and Wilson Hayes. Bibulatov's first name is Magomed, right? I'm not just
yeah, I believe so.
not just like xenophobically applying that to any like Caucasian fighter whose first name I don't actually know.
Nope.
But John Moraga, 2 classic veteran performances in the year of 2018 that have put him back in contention just in time for the flyweight division to be shut down for good. All right. Well, Phil, your thoughts on the field?
Sean O'Connell is a stirring kind of tale of one of MMA's more beloved figures who managed to pick up $1 million paycheck after cleaning out the field at light heavyweight as an underdog in the PFL. I think Vinny Magalhaes, for all his many, many flaws, has never been a bad athlete. Mm-hmm. And so that one, I think, is, it's pretty impressive. Blachowicz Manuwa, again, I think maybe we started to slightly underplay Blachowicz as an athlete. And I think Manuwa might be coming to the end of his athletic prime. He's always picked up a lot of injuries. Gedalia Ansarov was also tremendously impressive. I think Ansarov did have one major advantage, which was her frame.
Yep, reach.
That she's just
And speaking of fighters who are experiencing at least some kind of downturn or tribulations both in and outside the cage, Claudia Gadelha has had a difficult time getting back on and staying on track.
So I think for me it's got to be John Moraga this year. I mean, because he's got 2 of those performances.
I know.
He knocked out Bibulatov, which was Bibulatov's last. Oh no! Wait a minute. That was in 2017.
Oh no! Listen, don't mention it. Okay, it still belongs in the field. Okay. He did beat Wilson Hayes, though. He did beat Wilson Hayes. Both tremendous performances. Wilson Hayes also looking a little faded these days. But John Moraga, I mean, I'm agreeing with you here, Phil. I'm going to pick Moraga, whether it's for the Bibulatov fight that definitely did happen in 2018 or the Wilson Hayes one that also definitely happened. Either way, John Moraga this is the Rebush Chalice, And John Moraga is one of those fighters who has specifically always been close to my heart, but he's the perfect archetype of the kinds of fighters I tend to root for. He's bafflingly inconsistent sometimes. Sometimes he just can't get his head straight. He just can't turn it on. But a lot of times it's because his opponents are cheating, Because John Moraga is not a great athlete. He's not super fast. He's not very powerful. He doesn't have a tremendous frame. In a lot of realms of physicality, he falls short. And yet, that Wilson Hayes performance against a much better athlete, a more experienced opponent who has been to higher echelons of competition and succeeded more, and John Moraga fought him perfectly. Is showing some of the boxing skills that have sort of been here and there and not always consistently present in his game. Everything seems to be coming together for John Moraga now. In this late stage of his career, and he's at like a 3-fight win streak. Is he still riding that win streak?
He was until he ran into a Patrick Wyman nominee.
Oh, it was Figueiredo. Yeah.
Athleticism.
Yeah.
The voice whispers from beyond the veil.
Had Moraga beaten Davis and Figueiredo, that would have absolutely been a runaway winner for a category like this. But that's why we have to have this category, because athletic ability is cheating, and it's unfair, and you shouldn't root for fighters who are good at what they do. You should root for fighters who try really hard. And John Moraga tried so hard, and he did it, goddammit. So congratulations to John Moraga and all the other winners. We hope all of you have enjoyed all of these handies from Phil and I and the listeners of Heavy Hands who graciously supplied so many of our categories. Pretty good. I'm feeling all right about 2018 in retrospect, Phil. I mean, limited solely to what happened inside the octagon. I'm feeling okay about 2018. Everything else is terrible. But, yeah, there was some good stuff to see in the world of the UFC and MMA this year. Some of the categories a little weaker than we would have liked, but some of them much stronger than we're used to. Lots of up-and-comers, lots of great fights, and yeah, looking forward to a big 2019 for Heavy Hands. Phil, this is also, of course, it's the year of Phil McKenzie on Heavy Hands. So a special shout out and thanks to you for joining the show and making such a wonderful addition.
Thank you for having me. It has been awesome.
All right. Well, it's been awesome having all of you listen. We really appreciate it. Find us on social media if you want to yell at us about how we missed essential categories or essential nominees. I'm sure you will have opinions to share, and you can do that on Twitter most easily of all. Find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson, and you can find me at Boxing Bush. That's Busch. Do you have anything coming out in this interim between UFC events, Phil?
I do. I should have so I wrote a piece a while back, which is about looking at the UFC strategy and through the lens of Sage Northcutt and why the UFC cut him, or at least let him go. They didn't actually cut him. And I think this may be a little, it's obviously slightly out of date, but it may be a little more relevant considering the recent kind of Colby Covington news, because the basic gist of the piece is that what the UFC values at the moment, due to the way its business is structured, is compliance more than anything else. And this is what it does its best to clamp down on. So, keep an eye out for that. Should be out within the next couple of days, I would hope. And, yeah.
All right. Sounds fascinating. As for me, I got a couple things in the works, but I'm not going to make any promises yet. We're in an interim here, but I should advise you to check out the MMA Depressed Us. We had an episode last week. I've already wiped from my mind the bad fights that we watched, although one of them was Chad
BJ
Mendes.
Penn. Oh no, sorry, it was the Mendes against
Swanson, which was way too good to be on that show in retrospect. But then we also watched Tyron Woodley laying on top of someone, didn't we?
You goddamn racist piece of shit, Connor. No, we watched Anthony Johnson against Dan Hardy.
No, I only thought because you suggested Tyron Woodley as one of the options. We were like, who had the really boring pre-prime period of their career? Chad Mendes, Tyron Woodley, Anthony Johnson. I'm so sorry.
That's your explanation.
So make sure you check that out. We'll have another episode of the MMA Depressed Us coming out this week. Join us to watch bad fights, sort of MST3K style. And until next time, next week we will return. Not sure what we're going to be talking about, but coming up around the corner, the UFC schedule kicks off and will return to its usual relentlessness very soon. So we're looking forward to that and an overall good 2019. Thank you all again for listening. I hope you're okay with the fact that this episode was long as hell, and if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.